In this video, we will be recreating this AI generated video. To view the full animation, the link will be in the top right corner. In my previous tutorial, I received a comment from Eddie Sampson that read, so in this video, the explanations will be more slower and extensive. Thanks to Eddie Sampson for bringing that out. We will begin our animation process in After Effects, then make use of a plugin called AE2SD, which the link will be listed in the description, and ultimately we will generate our animation using Deforum Stable Diffusion. Once we are in After Effects, the first thing we need to do is to create a new composition, which will be 864 by 480. We're going to be animating in 24 frames, and also we are going to have this at 2 minutes. Then we just go to OK. First thing we need to do is to add our plugin by going to Windows, Extension, Motion Blur 4. And if you want to know how the plugin also works and you're coming across this for the first time, visit the link in the top right corner to have a good understanding. So we are going for a 3D scene. I'm going to click here, which will create the whole 3D composition for us down here. I can close this. We'll switch all of these layers off. We don't need all of this. The only thing we need for Deforum is the camera animation and also the prompts. So I'm going to switch off all of this by hitting the shy layer here in After Effects, which turns everything off. So to achieve the look we had, we are going to be animating the camera properties of rotation Z, also rotation Y, and also X position. So down here, if we come to rotation Z, we are going to start from 1 second. And from 1 second, I'm going to put in a keyframe here. We are going to be animating in the interval of 4 seconds. Time frame here to start and also to end here. So this was a trick I explained earlier on in the initial tutorial. You can find the link in the top right corner. So from 1 second we move to 4 seconds, and this is just a guideline for us to have a visual balance of everything. I'm going to put this next at -15, so that swings the camera to the right, and basically this is the whole idea of the underground water scene, which we are going to repeat this throughout the entire animation. So I'll just move this, copy this, and it comes back to 0. So basically it's just swinging and coming back to its position. We are going to repeat throughout the entire 2 minutes of the animation. So we're at 0 here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this 2, paste it here, and I move here again. And once again, since we are at 0, we need to start from -15. Copy this, I bring this here, and also I paste this here. So if we should go for a preview, this is what we have. From the final output we saw, so I'll just bring this back here, and I'll just shift this here. And we are at 0, so it means we move back to -15. And what I'll do is I'm going to copy all of this and copy paste it here, so it's more quicker. And when I move this here, we're at 50 seconds now. Now I'll just start this here, and this is back to 0. And what we can do is we can, once again, I am only copying from this keyframe because it starts at -15, right? So not to get confused, it's the reason why I'm copying from here and not to copy the 0. So when I copy from -15, I can always repeat everything because this is starting at 0. So I'll just copy, and I'll just Control C here and Control V here. So we are almost there, 2 minutes long, and I'll come back to this again. I'll just move this here just to get a good balance. So this is going to give us something like this. After pasting all our keyframes, that means we have our first camera position animated, which is camera C, to the next camera position we want to animate, which is the Y rotation. And one resource that always helps me to have a good understanding of what I'm doing is to visit this page to have a good reference of how you want your animations to move. It's one of the resources that I always have opened whenever I'm animating a camera for Deforum animation. So we're moving next to our 3D Y rotation, which from here we can see it's moving left, and also we can move right in After Effects, but the parameters here only works with Deforum. Just to clarify that, this doesn't mean we are putting this in After Effects. It works differently with After Effects, but I'm only referencing this because we are using the visual display preview to give us a good idea of what we are doing. But these numbers here only works with Deforum. So if you're animating straight from Deforum, you can use these numbers here as it's saying. And I'm sure if you put in a -2, it's going to go in the opposite direction. But from After Effects, we are only using this as a preview visually. So if we go back to After Effects now and we come back to our Y rotation, we are going to start from 0 seconds on the Y rotation. And at 0 seconds, I'm going to put a keyframe here, and we are going to animate this in 30 seconds intervals. So this is going to be quite a huge skip, and I'll put in my markers here. And we are going to go in the negative direction to -90. So we are still going to move all the way to another 30-second interval. And from here, what I did was we go all the way to 45 seconds instead of another 30. We come back to 45 seconds. Rather than having all these keyframes showing, what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit U. We are going to see the only keyframes we are working with, so it doesn't get too intimidating. So at 45 seconds, I'm still going to hold this. We have this from 0, it moves to 90, -90. And at 45 seconds, we still keep this at -90, which means we have nothing happening here in the Y position. Next, we are going to move to 1 minute 15 seconds, which is here. So this is a lot of playing around that I did to achieve the results we have now. I'm just putting in the numbers here and also the time frames here, so everything is quicker. We are going to put this back at 0. So this means from 90, we go back still at 90, but from -90, we are going to move all the way to 0, which brings back our prompt here. We're going to move to 1 minute 15 seconds here. Move to 1 minute 30 seconds here. I'll trim my timeline here. And from here, we are going to hold again, which means we don't want any animation from here to here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put in another 0. So this means this and this are the same, and there's nothing happening here. So we can see. So our last keyframe for Y rotation would be from 0 to -90 back again. And so far, if we should preview what we have, to have a good visual look at how this camera is behaving, I'm going to add a few more prompt reference so we can see what's happening in the 3D world. I believe from the final render we had 4 different prompts, if I am right. So I'll just put this randomly in between these 2 minutes so we can have a good visualization of what's actually happening with the camera. And I'll preview again. So now you guys can actually see what's happening. And these prompts are in 3D placement. So we can still see the Y rotation, we can still see the Z rotation of what's happening. So the next parameter we are going to go for is the X position. For now, we have to open everything fully. And when we come here, we're going to see the X position. But once I put a keyframe here and I press U, we only see the parameters we are working with. We are going to animate similar to rotation Y, and it's also going to be in the 30 interval segment. So I'm going to trim my timeline. We'll have this at 0 seconds. And when we move to 30 seconds, we are going to shift this all to negative 500. So in the final animation, as much as this was moving, it was also moving and shifting the whole animation to the left, which is X position. So let's have a quick preview of what's happening. So things are becoming a little bit more smoother as we are adding more parameters. And I'm moving on X position. At 30 seconds, we're going to go to 45 seconds. So at 45 seconds and on X position, we are going to repeat this keyframe, which was negative 500. And I can either copy or paste, or I can just click this here just to repeat the same keyframe. And I will move to the next one, which is 1 minute 15 seconds. We're going to go all the way back to 0, swinging back to the right. And we'll move to 1 minute 30 seconds. What we are going to do is we are going to hold this position again. So I repeat this keyframe, which is 0 and 0. And at 2 minutes, I'll just bring everything back to negative 500, which will move everything to the left. X position done. The next keyframe, which is going to be our final keyframe, is going to be the zooming in animation, because you guys can see here it zooms out at some point, which was achieved by the zoom parameter, which is Z position. So if I bring this, close this, we go to the Z position here, which is our zoom in 3D. In the Z position, we are going to be animating in the 6-second interval. If we come here to 6, trim my timeline, and at 0 seconds, we're going to put 0. At 6 seconds, we are going to zoom in all the way in to 700. Remember I told you guys I played around a lot to get these numbers, which I'm putting in directly to save time. So from 6 seconds, we move to 12 seconds. And from here, we are going to move all the way in again. Easiest thing you can do here is to just add 700 to 700. So that takes us to 1400. And from 1400, we're going to move to another 6 seconds. And we are going to add another 700. So basically, we are zooming in the intervals of 700 within every 6 seconds, if that's a good explanation. So this will give us 2100 at 18 seconds. And if I should zoom out a bit, you guys can see things are getting a bit complicated here with our keyframes. But to achieve the look, we had to animate a lot of parameters. So from 18 seconds, we move to 24 seconds, which I'm going to do this again, plus 700. It's zooming in, but I think we can't really see it because we don't have any of the prompts there. So in 6 seconds, we go again to 30 seconds. At 30 seconds, we're going to go to plus 700. Right, so we continue. Right, so if we should run a preview now, let's see what we have. So even though we don't see the prompt, you guys can basically see a fair idea of how the camera is moving. So to complete our final parameter, which is Z position, we move next to 36 seconds. And just to have a good balance of everything, we move this to 36 seconds. We still keep the normal procedure of adding 700, which zooms in. We move to 42 seconds plus 700, which zooms in once again. We move to 45 seconds. So at this point, we move to 45 seconds, but we don't keep the same interval. We make this a bit shorter. Add 700 to this. This is supposed to be an extreme zoom in because the keyframes are very, very closer compared to the 6-second interval. So from here, we move to 1 second. And at 1 second, what I did was I placed a hold keyframe here. I'm going to copy 5600, paste it here. And I forgot to do this, but by pressing U again, we are going to hide everything we don't need and we'll just focus on what we are working on. So Z position here, I'm going to color this so we can also focus on this. I'll make this blue. Okay. So at 1 minute, what I'm going to do is, or what I did was, I reversed all of this zoom in because we've been zooming in from the beginning, adding 700 to each keyframe. And from here, coming back to 2 minutes, I'm going to copy all of this. I'm going to paste this here, but then it's going to be reversed. So instead of zooming in, now from 1 minute to 2 minutes, we are going to be zooming out till the end. So I'll delete this quickly, not to have double keyframes. Control V here. And at this point, it's still zooming in. But what I need to do is just right click, keyframe assistant, time reverse keyframes. Everything is going to go back to the opposite, which means now we are repeating all the keyframes here, but now it's just going in a zooming out direction until the end. But it's always good to run a preview once in a while to see what you want to have. So at this point, it's a preference, but you can also move ahead into Stable Diffusion and start copying these camera animations into Stable Diffusion. But what I did was I would go into each parameter from here, play around with the graph editor to make sure these keyframes are smoother. First of all, when I select X position, I'm going to press on the F9 on the keyboard, which is going to change these keyframes, which means these are easy eased. If you easy ease, you are not moving at a linear pace, but then you are starting gradually, speeding up, and also ending gradually. So that's what I did with most of the keyframes, not all of the keyframes, but with X position, easy ease, Z rotation, easy ease as well, and Z position, easy ease. I'm going to go to the X position. I'm going to go into the graph editor. I played around with some of these keyframes. So what I'm trying to achieve here is to move very fast here, which is going to look something like this. So on the X position, it's going to start very fast. It moves slow. And here, you guys remember, here is where we have the hold keyframe. So nothing happens here, and you guys can see it's a straight line here, right? It means nothing is happening. And here we have a movement. Or what I tried to achieve here was to move slower as a build up, and when it gets here, it becomes faster, right? And also we have the hold keyframe here, so nothing happens here. And when we get here, also we move faster in the beginning, and yeah, it slows down to the end. So this was the actual graph editor I had for the exposition, and I'm gonna close this here. The next graph editor was the Z position. So in the Z position, which is quite a lot, we are going to do the same thing, go into the graph editor. So if the graph editor looks a bit intimidating to you, taking some time to learn about a graph editor really gives you a good advantage of controlling your animation speed in After Effects. What I'm going to do here, I'm going to select all of this, and what's going to happen is you guys can see all of this are separated, right? When I move this up, you guys can see there's one keyframe here and there's also another keyframe here. But what we want to have is to blend all of them together as one. But now we realize they were separated. So what I'm going to do is to select everything from everything I have selected. I'm going to select all of these as well, holding shift. And once these are selected, to have them all as one, right click, we go to keyframe velocity. Under keyframe velocity, we just check this box here, which means instead of them being as different keyframes, now we have everything as one. We merged everything together and we are moving everything as one. So since I have everything selected, to achieve the final look was to, if I move to the first keyframe, bring this in, and also it's ending slow. So we have this kind of a wavy uphill look with the keyframes. That was how I achieved the look with all the keyframes with Z position. The last parameter here to work in the graph editor would be the Z rotation. And once we have everything selected with the Z rotation, we go into the graph editor, which also looks a lot. But I didn't really do too much here. I would zoom into the first one. We'll do the same thing we did with the Z position. Keyframe, we'll make everything as one. You guys can see when I move this, everything moves. I'm going to select everything here. Once everything is selected, I'll zoom in a bit. And the look I tried to achieve here was to also make this a bit sharper, but not too sharp, and something like this. So we are done with everything here, and we are done with our keyframes, and we can always run a preview to see what we have. We have this floating camera movement. If I should bring all of this closer, which I explained in the initial tutorial, you can always move your prompts around, unlike the forum. Instead of running for 2 minutes preview, just a quick 30 seconds preview here of what we have. And you can see the huge difference between just adjusting these keyframes in the graph editor from what we had before. So it goes a long way just having a good foundation with how the graph editor works, which is not the intention of this tutorial. So once we are happy with everything, 2 minutes, we don't need to care so much about this prompt, because for now we'll go into Stable Diffusion and we'll try to find our style. From After Effects to Stable Diffusion, our first step here is to decide on what prompt and style we are going to be using for our animation. If you guys would like to achieve the same look as my web UI, you can watch the video in the top right corner, which will guide you on how to achieve this. Before creating our prompt, what we need to do is to find the style. You can use a platform like Lexica. This was what I actually used for my prompt. But before this, you can always scroll through to find inspiration from other creators. You can always copy the prompt. You don't need to have exactly the same thing from what you copied from the platform. You can always add your subject, which I explained in the initial tutorial of how to change your subject and how to add your style. We just want to see the look of what we are going to be animating in the forum. So we are only using the text to image to visualize what we are going to have in our final animation. Once we have this satisfied, we copy this from here. And what we need to do is we go back to After Effects. And from here, now start putting in our prompts, right? So we don't need to first worry about our prompt. We first worry about our animation. Once we have our camera done, we go into Stable Diffusion and we start looking for our visual representations to put into After Effects. So once we are happy with this, our second prompt is going to be different from what we copied. So we just need to change this, right? So the subject we're going to go for is a shark swimming in the sea. I'll just put the subject here. So once we have this and we like the look, we also copy this from here. And all we are doing is getting a visual representation of what we want to have in the animation. I double click here and I paste this here. Our third prompt is going to be an octopus swimming. Paste this here, regenerate. And this also gives us this look here. You can always modify your look depending on your checkpoint. We copy this. We go into After Effects and we paste this here as our third prompt. And our fourth prompt will be a treasure box underwater. So I paste this here, and once we generate this, we have something like this, which was amazing. Copy this as well as the fourth and final prompt. Move to After Effects, double click here, and I just pasted this here. You can always shift this around. It depends what you're going for, but you can always move this around just to have a good balance. We need to copy this from here back into Stable Diffusion. We move to the Deforum tab, and in the Deforum tab, we need to fill out all these tabs here with the settings we started with in After Effects. So in our composition in After Effects, we see our HD resolution at 864 by 480, which we need to do the same here, 864 by 480. We put our steps to 25. Usually you can match your steps to the settings you had with your text to image if it's 20, and if you want to achieve the same thing, you can always bring it down to 20. Also, when you go back here, you can see the sampler was a DPM plus plus 2M cars, which you need to do the same thing here. And with the seed, you always need to make sure if we had 20 seed here and we generated like we have here, you can go ahead to put in the same seed down in your deforum. And I explained in the previous tutorial why you should never leave your seed at -1. So not to go too much into that, our batch name is the name you want to give to your animation. So we can call this thing down here. The next tab is the keyframes. This is where we need to put our camera animations. We don't need 2D because we animated in 3D. So we select 3D. And when we come to After Effects, we have our keyframes here. So this is where the plugin comes in. When we come to Windows, Extension, Motion Pro, in the description, I'm going to include a tutorial of how to actually install this plugin to use in After Effects. So once we are here, when you click on the Info tab, Show Properties for Copy, we will need to copy all of this into Stable Diffusion. Since we animated in a 3D world, once we click the 3D animated properties, and once I click Translation X, it's going to give us all the parameters to paste into the forum. So I'll just copy this here, which is Translation X. If we come back to Stable Diffusion, in our 3D selected, we make sure we look for translation X, which is this here, paste this here, Control V, and we do the same for all the other parameters, which is translation C is next. Translation Z, once we click, we have all our settings here. Back to Stable Diffusion, we look for translation Z. What to do is to paste this here, and also rotation 3dy, rotation 3dy. This is not too much. Rotation 3dy, and the last one will be rotation 3dz. Rotation 3dz. Copy this. If this seems a bit too quick for you, the whole interface of the plugin was explained earlier, which, like I mentioned, I would include in the description in case you want to figure out how this plugin actually works. So back in Stable Diffusion, 3dz, I'll paste this here, which means we have all our camera animations we worked on in our settings parameters here in Deforum. The next thing we need to do under these keyframe tabs is to put in the maximum frames here, which in After Effects was 2 minutes. Another resource that I use, the time code to frame calculator. Only thing we need to do is to fill out this part, which is 24 frames. We are animating at 24 frames for 2 minutes. We just put 2 minutes here. It tells us the number of frames. In my initial tutorial, I made a mistake. You need to actually type what you see here. So don't copy paste. Type this here as 2880 to avoid any errors whilst exporting. Once we are done here, replicate wrap. Usually I go for wrap. Our next tab to fill out is the prompt. It's easily done for us here because I'll close this. To move all of these prompts to Stable Diffusion, all we need to do is to come back to the plugin again. We come to copy data. We come to other, prompt by markers. It generates all our prompts for us, similar to what we see in Stable Diffusion. If we go back to Stable Diffusion, or backspace here, and we put in all our prompts we had in After Effects. If you feel you need any negative prompts, you can also include a negative prompt here. Our next tab is the init. I don't usually have anything here. Control net, no. Hybrid, I didn't use any. And in the outputs, the only thing we need to change under this tab is the frames per second. You guys can see our frames per second we used in After Effects was 24 frames per second. If we come back to Stable Diffusion, we just need to change this to 24 per second. If you are sure you have all your settings correctly from After Effects, once you hit generate, you should start exporting from Stable Diffusion to achieve the final look which we have here. So I'm just going to click generate to see what we have. So there we go. You guys can see we have a replicate of what the final video actually looked like. So I'm going to stop this generation for now, and if you guys want to see other AI animated video with cool camera animations, you guys can check the video on the screen.